All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to NAGC's October edition of Webinar Wednesdays. We are very happy to have you here today. My name is Bethany Hornbeck. I am Professional Development Director for NAGC, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation and you find it useful to your role. Our topic today is crisis communication. We have an outstanding speaker joining us. She is going to be talking about how her organization dealt with a significant crisis in terms of both external and internal communications. But before we start, I'd like to take a minute or two to invite everyone here to next month's presentation, Measuring Communication Success, How to Target ROI in a Qualitative Field. We're going to be lucky enough to be joined by the Associate Director of Digital Marketing and Engagement at the American Diabetes Association. Her name is Ms. Christina Francisco, and she's going to be talking with us about how we can design measures for our communications projects, how we can implement those designs, and how we can collect the results and share them within our organizations. And I know that like crisis communications, measuring success is important to so many of us. So we will have two terrific presentations in a row from two accomplished communicators. I've also been asked to remind you about next June's NAGC Communications School, which of course we'll be holding in Washington, D.C. NAGC has a call for speakers out right now. So if you are interested in presenting at the school, you can visit the website to get some more information, to download a presentation, submission form, etc. Or if you know someone who would make a good speaker, either for a breakout session or as a keynote, please let us know or pass that speaker information on to them, because we definitely looking for a good, rich agenda for the school, and the theme this year is shaping the future of communications. We also just opened the Blue Pencil and Gold Screen Awards competition today. So ID your best publications and get them ready for submission. You might be interested to know that we have extended the reporting period this year to 18 months. That means that anything that was completed between July 1st of 2014 or up through December 31st of this year is eligible for entry. So that gives everyone a little bit broader time range that they can pull their publications from. The committee is accepting early bird nominations until December 18th, and they'll take standard nominations until January 15th. And we'll be having a webinar on how to win an award and also how to judge an award, or judge the nominations coming up here in December and January, so keep an eye out for that. And finally, thank you very much to everyone who responded to our Webinar Wednesday survey last month and gave us their reactions to our September speaker. Your feedback was very valuable. We're going to be sending another survey out after today's presentation and probably the next few presentations, because we want to make sure we're collecting your input, getting your suggestions for future topics. And so if you've got some time to provide that information, we really appreciate that, and we'll do the best we can to incorporate any of your thoughts. And now it's time for our feature presentation. Please join me in welcoming to Webinar Wednesdays Ms. Annie Skinner, Senior Communications Director for the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. Welcome, Ms. Skinner.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Skinner is going to be presenting to us for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we will open the floor to questions. So during her presentations, you in the audience, go ahead and type them into the questions box and the GoToMeeting bar on your screen as those come up. We'll hold those in queue until Ms. Skinner has finished her prepared remarks, and then we'll cycle through those in the order that they were posted. So thank you for your patience, Ms. Skinner. Welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me here today. I'm really excited about the opportunity, and I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a glitch there. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be here today. I'm looking forward to sharing with you guys something that was a really big case for our organization, and I think hopefully we will take away some good, important pieces. So moving forward, I wanted to start out a little bit today by talking to you about who we are and what we do. And I think a lot of times when everybody hears anti-doping agency, this is kind of what they think about, that we're looking for people who are kind of pumped up on steroids and that are out there behaving like sort of freak shows on the athletic field. And really it's much broader than that, and it's looking at you know, doping can be a variety of things. It isn't necessarily just about getting big. It can be about increasing your blood capability. It's about your lungs. It can be a whole variety of things. So I wanted to kind of dispel this rumor beginning as we start out this process. So a little bit about who USADA is and why we do what we do, because I think it really weighs into a lot of how we handled this situation and how we coordinated this strategic communications plan leading into this case. And really, USADA is the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. We're responsible for the anti-doping program for all Olympic, Paralympic, and Pan American athletes here in the U.S. And our mission is to preserve the integrity of competition, inspire true sport, and protect the rights of clean athletes. And we really speak every day as a staff about why we're here, and why we're here is for those clean athletes, to make sure that they're not cheated out of what should rightfully be theirs. And we do that through testing, handling results management, so adjudicating cases where athletes have violated the rules. We do that through science and research, and then really primarily one of our big key important areas is education, helping our athletes to understand the risks associated with doping, not just from an ethical standpoint, but also from the serious health consequences, but also why it's important to compete clean and what that means from a value standpoint. So moving on, a little bit about why we care. I get asked the question all the time, well, why not just let everybody dope? You know, they're adults, they're competing, we won't have to worry about it, let everybody do whatever they want to do. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about why we care, and I think it comes down to really the athletes that we're looking to protect. And starting out, this is Taylor Hooten. Taylor was a 17-year-old baseball player who wanted to make it into college baseball, wanted to play in the major leagues, and he saw what was going on in baseball and thought he really needed to use performance-enhancing drugs in order to get to that next level. Unfortunately, Taylor was taking testosterone and a variety of other steroids that can really mess with a young person's mind and body, and can cause some serious depression. And unfortunately, as a side effect of that usage, he committed suicide. So he's certainly a victim of doping. This is Scott Mercier. Scott was a professional cyclist. He competed against Lance Armstrong and a variety of the other folks that were found to have been doping during their career. And Scott had to make the decision. He got up to the tops of the tops in cycling, and someone approached him and told him if he wanted to continue to stay on the team, he needed to use drugs. And Scott was unwilling to do that and had to leave the sport he cared about because he wasn't willing to use drugs in order to be successful. And so Scott's definitely a victim of doping because he never gets to know how successful he could have been had the sport been clean back during the time he was competing. This is Adam Nelson. Adam's a shot putter. He's a shot put athlete. He had won a silver medal at the Olympic Games back in 2008. And about 9 years later, it was after some retroactive testing, we developed some new testing technologies as a global anti-doping community, and they retested samples from those games and found that the person who'd won the gold medal ahead of him had been cheating. And so Adam got his gold medal about 9 years late. And unfortunately, you know, he'd missed out on the opportunity to stand on the podium and have heard the national anthem. He missed out on the sponsorship opportunities that come with being a gold medalist, and so certainly he's been a victim of doping. And I think this is particularly one of the areas that we're most concerned about, and why we work so hard doing what we do. This is Corey Gahan. Corey was a 13-year-old inline roller skater, and his dad and doctor got him on a very sophisticated anti-doping program because they wanted him to be the world's best inline roller skater, which was really traumatic for Corey. His father ended up going to jail. Corey has had some challenges with that and his past and history moving forward. So really, you know, we know that the risk of doping exists at all levels, and so this was really a hard case. This is another example of that, tagging off of why we sort of have to do what we do and why we have to be involved in protecting sport, and particularly from a health and safety aspect. This was a column from the Florida Sun Sentinel about parents who are now going to low testosterone clinics, going to these, you know, youth extension clinics and getting prescriptions for things like human growth hormone and testosterone, and then taking those drugs and giving them to their young athletes, particularly at the high school football level, to try to make them competitive. So I tell you these stories not to terrify you, but really to explain why it is that we're so concerned about the drugs in sport, and why we don't just say, let's just let everybody dope, because it does have real consequences. So to start out a little bit into the cycling investigation, in 2010, our investigation into cycling started. You see the gentleman with the tattoos up on the top, and his arms with the fridge. What he's holding in there are vials of EPO. Kale Leo Grand He was one of the first positives that we had started to see out of cycling, and then Tyler Hamilton down there holding the gold medal and Floyd Landis in the yellow jersey. We started to see in the beginning of 2010 more and more cyclists that were testing positive, that were having cases brought against them. And we began to think that this was probably a broader issue. And so we started an investigation into the sport of cycling. It did not begin as a case against Lance Armstrong or the Postal Service cycling team. It started just at looking into cycling in general, what was happening in the culture, and why we were seeing so many cases of doping happening. There'd always been rumors, but we started to have really more tangible evidence beginning in 2010. And as I said, Floyd Landis had been stripped of his Tour de France title in 2006 after a battle with us about a doping case. But then in 2010, he decided that he was tired of lying and was going to come in and have a conversation with us and really open up the floodgates on what was happening in the sport during that investigation. So Floyd really kicked off that discussion as well. Interestingly enough, some of the media started to pick up on that as well, and really Lance had always been dodged a lot by doping rumors. There'd been a lot of it going on since back in '99. This is a story from 2011 from Sports Illustrated, and I highlight it because this was the first time that Lance really used his social media strategy to start trying to engage with us. Unfortunately, he got our Twitter handle wrong, and I will tell you that the person who has the @USADA Twitter handle really had a rough go throughout this process, because our Twitter handle is actually @US Anti-Doping, but the @USADA person is a gentleman in Japan, and unfortunately people said some very horrible things to him throughout this process. So, but this was really the first time Lance sort of engaged in conversation on social media, which became a really key component of his strategy moving forward in the case. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit. So moving forward, Tyler Hamilton, also a former teammate of Lance's, went on to 60 Minutes in May of 2011, discussing what his experience had been and really confirming what we had already been hearing from Floyd and from other folks. And interestingly enough, simultaneously, while our investigation was going on, the federal government had been looking into any potential criminal activity that had happened during that time. And sort of out of deference to the federal government, we chose to step aside and pause our investigation while their investigation was ongoing. And Tyler had spoken to a grand jury in California about his experience, and then went on to share that on 60 Minutes as well. Not too long after Tyler went on 60 Minutes, a couple of minutes after it aired, interestingly enough, this was a statement from Lance Armstrong, and he started really going on the attack and the offensive, which at this point in time we had not formally brought our case against him. And so this was an opportunity really for us to see what he was saying out in the public and to look for sort of those trends and what his talking points would be, so we would be prepared for that moving forward. And I highlighted here in red the 500 tests, because that was a really big talking point for him that he kept using over and over and over again, which, isn't really accurate, but it was a talking point that got a lot of traction. So you can start to see where those key talking points came into play as we were becoming prepared for our communication strategy. Moving on to February of 2012, the U.S. Attorney's Office decided to shut down their investigation. They had convened a grand jury. They did not let the grand jury go to make a decision. They just shut the investigation down and shut the grand jury in regards to that. So that really was a signal to us that we were at the point where we were going to need to move forward with the case. We had a substantial amount of evidence, a substantial amount of witness information, and really at that point we had to follow our mandate to move forward with the case. And so that's really where we did. You can see some of the media that was coming around talking about this, because the media had been very aware of what was going on with the investigation, and now knew that it would be our responsibility to move forward now that the federal government had declined. So really, and that's a key piece for us, is we're not a government agency. We do receive a grant from the Office of National Drug Control Policy, but our role is to handle sports rule violations, not legal cases. So we don't handle criminal or civil. We focus on on violations of the anti-doping rules. So our plan really going into it was one goal, and that was to get at the truth. What was the actual truth about what was happening, and how clean athletes had been cheated in this cycling sport. And so, but moving forward, we had to really attack our strategic plan on 3 fronts, and that was on the legal front, obviously, the political front, and the public relations side. And the political front also had a lot of public relations pieces to it, obviously, because Mr. Armstrong and his team had a lot of political influences. They had friends in really high places, and we knew that we were going to need to be prepared to help educate and to work in those arenas as well. So moving forward, one of the things that when we started the communication strategy planning was we knew that when you can't attack the truth, that you would attack the people in the process. And he wasn't going to be able to attack the truth because he knew what the truth was, and we had a substantial amount of information about that. So he really went after us, he went after the witnesses personally, and went after the process, the adjudication process. And that was one of the key areas we knew going into it that he would work to do, because we had seen how that had happened in the past. We knew that he'd use all of his connections, not just celebrity, political, using the Livestrong organization, all of those pieces, to use those connections to stage the attack on his offensive strategy. We knew that it also wouldn't just affect sports fans, and I think that was really a different piece for us, because we're used to dealing with, we deal with high-profile athletes all the time. We'd had the Marion Jones case before, where she'd had to return 5 gold medals. We'd had a lot of high-profile athletes, but not to the same extent where Armstrong also had a legion of people in the cancer community who really looked up to him. And so we knew that that was going to be a little bit different than what we had encountered in the past. It also had a huge international impact, because because cycling itself is hugely popular around Europe and in Asia and a variety of other countries. And so we knew that it wasn't just going to be media and people from the U.S. who were going to be wanting to engage with us, but also all around the world. And certainly because of the Tour de France, the French were very involved as well. And that transparency was going to be key. We tried to be as absolutely transparent as we could be during the process, but also being mindful of what we were legally required to do as well. So making sure that we were being as communicative as we could be, being as transparent as we could be, to sort of offset that plan. So our communication strategy really focused at keeping our mission at the core of what we do and say. And I think we went into that very clear as an organization that we were probably going to be attacked. We were going to be attacked personally. We were going to be attacked as an organization. But we were not going to engage in attacking people. We were going to engage in keeping our mission at the core, doing what it is that we do, following our procedures, and doing so to the best of our ability in an extremely professional manner, just like we would with any other athlete. Anticipation. I can't tell you how many different versions of statements I had prepared. We knew that any time our legal team would send a letter to Mr. Armstrong's legal team, that would immediately get leaked. It would immediately become a story. And so I would have a lot of draft statements prepared to say, if he says this, then this is our response. If he says this, then this would be our response. So really anticipating and having those prepared ahead of time, so that when it did hit, we were immediately prepared to get our response to the appropriate people. Having one point of contact, and this was huge for us as an organization. Every single call, question, email got sent directly to the communications team. It alleviated a lot of pressure on the rest of our internal staff. Keep in mind, in 2012, we were getting prepared for the 2012 London Games, so the rest of our staff really needed to be focused on that. So it alleviated a lot of stress off of our internal staff, that they could just send any questions on to our comms team. And it also really helped us to control what was said, how it was said, and who it was said to, because, and I mean everyone from our board of directors down to our receptionist at the office all sent everybody back to our team, and that really helped to keep the message exactly where it needed to be and appropriate. And it also really, I can't say enough of how much that was important for our internal staff to be able to continue to do their job every day and not have to deal with the barrage of questions. So internal communications obviously was really key as well, letting our staff know what was happening, where we were in the process, that what was happening in the news media wasn't necessarily what was actually happening in our office, and making sure that they were aware that what they were seeing in the media and what was actually truthful. And so I think that was a really good important part for us. Focusing on the big picture, and that was key, because I think when you get into a long, drawn-out crisis period, and keep in mind this went on from beginning of February 2011 all the way through until October of 2012, and it really continued on into 2013. So this is a long period of time to be dealing in sort of a crisis mode. And so we had to focus on the big picture. There were going to be different stages throughout the process where we were going to have different issues, but we couldn't get bogged down in each individual battle, if you will. We had to look at the final outcome, which was really to make sure that the process was done fairly and that the outcome was focused on the truth. So that was important for us as we moved forward. And then surrogates. We had thousands upon thousands of email requests from reporters, calls from reporters around the world, and there was no possible way we were going to be able to do all of those interviews. And so it became really important for us to have people out there not necessarily talking about the case, but that knew about how anti-doping works, how the anti-doping adjudication process works, that could help to do some of those interviews or help to provide some of that information to people that we wouldn't be able to get to simply because of the massive volume. So that was really important for us as well. We also did a lot of education prep. So we prepared a lot of one-pagers. This is one about our organization in general. This was one about our testing and adjudication statistics, and sort of an overview of the arbitration process. And having those prepared ahead of time before we brought the case helped us to be ready to have easy things we could send to answer questions we knew we were going to get. So we got a million questions about how the arbitration process works, and we could easily have this one pager to send to them so that they could have the facts ready to go. So that was great. And we had this, I guess gift is the wrong word, but we were lucky to have, we knew that the case was going to be coming, and so we had time to prep before the case happened and before the crisis hit. And not every crisis obviously has that option, but it was really helpful to us in this situation that we did, so we could prepare as much as we could before it became a major media event. So moving forward into June, before we actually filed any initial charges, the Armstrong was offered the opportunity to come in and to meet with us, which was the same opportunity that was offered to all of our cycling athletes and witnesses, because really we knew that at the core of it, it wasn't just athletes. Athletes don't dope alone. They don't dope in a vacuum, and that there was a system in place that was helping this happen. And we really wanted to get to those doctors, trainers, sport professionals who were helping to perpetuate this problem. And so Armstrong was offered that opportunity, like the other athletes were, to come in. He was unfortunately the only one that chose not to, and really took that June letter to him as a launching point for his communication strategy attacking us. And I put this up here because after we sent him his charges, the Washington Post immediately ran an article, did not call us actually to check to see if any of it was right. They just went off what Armstrong's team had given to them about our charges. And so interestingly enough, a lot of people didn't make the connection, but the Washington Post, Sally Jenkins at the Washington Post, ghostwrote Armstrong's books. So the Washington Post was a key ally of his, if you will, throughout the beginning part of this process, using that relationship with Sally Jenkins. She didn't write this particular article, but that was the connection at the Post. And so he, as we discussed earlier, really began to use social media and now has our Twitter handle correct. But you can start to see where some of those links back to his official statement, starting to use some of the key terms that became terms he used throughout: witch hunt, unconstitutional. And this was his statement, and I highlighted and read some of the key messaging points that he was using that we really needed to have prepared to respond to over and over. And so I think those were really key things for us to be prepared for and to combat in our messaging as well. And he definitely used the social media piece a ton, really, to get his message out. I mean, at that time, our Twitter following was about 1,000 people, and he had 3 million people. So fighting this out in social media was not going to be an option for us, nor something that would be in line with our professional standards as an organization, in terms of we're not going to get involved in a Twitter battle with an athlete. But certainly it was very effective from his perspective, because he has so many followers and his message was getting out all across social media in this area. And you can see he was pulling Livestrong in as well, and Livestrong was sharing that as well. This was another interesting thing, and this was the first time I had really seen this done, and so it's something I just wanted to bring up because it was kind of a new thing for me. One of the things he had done was set up Tim Dockery, as this says, was a friend of his who wrote an article and put it on a site that appeared to be a news site. And so it looked like he was a reporter actually writing this story, when really it was a friend of his. And this got huge amounts of play, both on social media and on a broader perspective. And the whole article was full of things that aren't even remotely true about the process. But I thought this was just sort of an interesting thing to sort of set up a fake news look and feel to your story and then tweet about it, even though it doesn't actually have that have anything to do with an actual news organization. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing that grow amongst the blogosphere, if you will. Another thing he used was his connections with celebrities. This is Matthew McConaughey tweeted about us, and the link that he sent here was to a change.org petition to revoke our tax-funded status, and which is not accurate. We don't actually have tax-funded status, but we do get a grant from the Office of National Drug Control Policy, as I said, so they were hoping to attack that funding as well. And then really he used his media surrogate. So Michael Hiltzik was a really good friend of his that used to work at the LA Times. Rick Riley from ESPN was a friend of Armstrong's. And then, as I said, Sally Jenkins, who had ghostwritten his books, really used her column to attack us specifically, and you can see the headline here in that regard. They also used those same folks, Sally Jenkins and Rick Riley, to use social media as well to boost a bit of where Armstrong's media messaging was going. So public response, one of the things that was very effective from his communication strategy that we were dealing with was sort of the public response. So a lot of them, where some of the folks had pushed, was for them to donate to Livestrong and send us an email about that. A lot of them were emailing us directly. This was one of the actually nicer ones of the angry emails that I received from the general public. But we decided very early on, because of our transparency and because we do believe in our mission and we wanted to share that mission with others, that we would respond to all of the public emails. It was over 8,000 of them, so it took us a little while to get through it as a team. We have a small team. At the time, I was the only full-time media relations person, and we had 2 other folks that were helping me on the team. But we felt it was really important, and so we had a standard response that we sent to people who said really hateful things and didn't actually have a question. But we also had, for people that had legitimate questions or who really wanted to understand the issues, we would answer those questions as well. So it did take us a while, but we felt it was really important to do that, to respond to the public, and actually paid off for us in the long run. A lot of people wrote back and said, wow, I didn't think I'd get a response from you. And for some people, it changed their perspective on the issue, and then others still didn't like us. But at least we had responded, and I think that was really important from us. Political influences, and this was a big issue. So the Livestrong Foundation was also issuing statements attacking us, going after our information, particularly on our funding, which was really interesting. They also used their lobbying branch to lobby congressional members. So this was one from the House of Representatives and really from Senator Sensenbrenner, and he's in Wisconsin, which was interesting from this perspective because one of Armstrong's major sponsors is Trek, and Trek is headquartered in Wisconsin. So there was clearly some ties there. And interestingly, this letter specifically used some of the key talking points that Armstrong had been sharing in that letter to Congress. This was another one from California state senators that were writing to U.S. Senator Boxer and U.S. Senator Feinstein about Armstrong and about us. And interestingly, Armstrong had worked with the California State Senate to try to pass anti-smoking legislation, so then called in this request from them to write to our senators about our operation. We did fortunately have senators who had worked with us before, Senator John McCain, who had been involved with us on a variety of other supplement drug issues and knew us very well and issued a statement of support for us, which was helpful. But unfortunately, our senior staff had to spend some time educating congressional members on who we were, what we actually did, and what was actually truthful about our organization. And certainly once they received education and knew what the facts were, they were very supportive. But that did take some time out of our strategy to have to help do some education in that area. Armstrong sued us. He sued our organization, and then also our chief executive officer, specifically our CEO, Travis Tygart. He sued us back in July of 2012 to try to stop the case. This was a statement from a law professor about this, and certainly I can guarantee you we had thought it through. So we hope they thought it through before things got started. Well, we sure did. We knew where we were legally. We filed a motion to dismiss that case, and I put this quote up here. This was a section of our statement, and I think it really ties back to what we discussed at the beginning, that we were continuing to focus all of our messaging on our mission and why we're here, why we do what we're supposed to do, and really that's that we treat everybody the same. Every athlete is treated the same under the rules, and no matter how big you are, you still have to follow the same rules. The case was dismissed. The federal judge threw the case out and said that actually our process provided full legal due process to athletes, and therefore there was no reason for this lawsuit, and so the judge threw that case out. Because the judge threw that case out, Armstrong was really in a position where his choice was either to fight our charges through the adjudication process or to accept a sanction. Those were his two options, and so he determined that he was going to not fight the charges. He was not going to go through the adjudication process, and as such was going to know that he was going to receive a sanction. So at this point in time, I think really, I'm putting some words into their mouth, I guess, but I think it really their options were pretty limited, and I think they felt at this point in time they couldn't go to a hearing because obviously they knew that he had doped and knew that if we had evidence of that he was going to lose the case. And I think they really thought our best option is to have attacked them for as long as we have, to say we're just not going to engage anymore with this process, and hope that the people would just think, well, he just didn't care about what USADA had to say, so he didn't want to engage with them. And I think he really thought he could keep sort of people that cared about him and were fans of his, that they would stick with him even if he got a sanction, because at this point in time, none of the evidence had come out. And so I think that's really where he thought he could go with this. Unfortunately, they had not really read through the rules and were not prepared, I think, for the fact that we were required to issue a reasoned decision for why we were imposing a sanction on the athlete. And so I don't think they were prepared for the fact that was going to happen. But you can see shortly after he issued his statement and I highlighted this, he issued that statement on August 23rd around 10 p.m. And then shortly after that, you can see he specifically mentions our CEO and his name specifically in this case. That's at that 10:15 point in time. Shortly after that, we got the first death threat. So we're talking, within 20 or so minutes. And unfortunately, our CEO received a couple of death threats that had to be investigated by the FBI. This one is the tamest of the ones. So I have not I tried to black out some things, but it's definitely not the tamest of the attacks that were that this person said against him. And so there actually was an FBI investigation into 2 people that had sent death threats. Both of those were prosecuted in the federal court system and chose to take plea deals. This one right here was from a doctor from Florida who was very vile in some of the things that he had said in his death threats. The other one was a gentleman from Salt Lake City as well, but both of those people accepted plea agreements. So we get finally to the reasoned decision, and I think this was an important day for us because we had to deal with a lot of mini crisis throughout this process, and really, as we had discussed at the beginning of this, had to stay focused on knowing that the truth would come out, and then when the truth was out, we would then be able to really talk about the case and to talk about the evidence and to talk about the facts and where our organization was going. And so this was in October of 2012. We completed our reasoned decision and shared that publicly. One of the key things for us was we knew that this was going to drive a massive amount of traffic to our website. So we had to do a lot of prep ahead of time and talking with our AT folks about how do we make sure our website doesn't crash? What do we need to do? What do we have to put in place to make sure that our athletes are still having access to the parts of the site they need to, and that this whole thing doesn't take it down. So we actually decided to host it specifically on its own server to avoid that issue, and that was very, very important for us moving forward. I put this up here. This was our web traffic, and you can see September and then October. So the day before the announcement was made, we had 1,500 people visit the website, and the day within like the hour of it being posted had over 219,000 people visit. So being prepared for the web traffic was very important for us from a strategy perspective. These were some of our 1 week statistics from the website, with the main site getting these visits, and then the investigation page, which was a page specifically for the case, looking at these numbers. So this was a big drive for us, particularly when you look at how small those numbers had been previously for us. Our website is a lot used from an educational standpoint, but also the athletes use it pretty regularly as well. So media coverage. After the reasoned decision came out, we had a certain change of tone amongst all of the media. So really looking at that change also changed opinions from the public as well. We actually did have people who wrote me an apology email, which was very nice. They had sent me some angry emails before and actually followed back up to say, I'm really sorry I sent you a mean letter. So sometimes engaging with the public ended up in people responding to that. So really it was an opportunity for us to see that the strategic communications plan had worked, and while we had to fight some of those mini battles of crisis throughout the process, and we took a lot of hits to our reputation in the short term. In the long term, sticking with our plan, remaining professional, not engaging in Twitter battles, not making it personal, and sticking to our process and procedure and really being mission focused, got us to a point where at the end of this process, our reputation was in a really good position as an organization that was willing to do the work, the hard work, even when it's not popular. And I think that changed opinion was important. So certainly Armstrong had a lot of sponsors that dropped after this. I think at some points he said it was about a $75 million day for him in terms of loss of sponsors, and things really started to change after that. Given that we were now at a time where we could be fully transparent about the case because the case was concluded, we decided that we really wanted to sit down and do an in-depth interview where we could answer the hard questions. And sometimes during the process, given the legal ramifications, we weren't able to talk about certain things. And now that we could, we really wanted to answer those tough questions. And so 60 Minutes was familiar with the case. They had done the Tyler Hamilton piece, and obviously given their huge national draw, we thought they were really a great outlet to do that with. And so we did a sit-down interview with Scott Pelley to really outline that case. And that was a very effective strategy for us. We couldn't possibly fulfill all the media requests we did, and we were really cognizant of the fact that this was really a sad time. It's really disappointing when our heroes, our sports heroes, fall like that. And we weren't interested in grandstanding or beating our chests about it or going out there and doing some big media blitz, but really wanted to answer the substantive questions that people wanted to know from us and then really be able to do that and move on. And so 60 Minutes offered that opportunity for us. Right after our interview aired, we saw a tweet come out from Oprah Winfrey saying that she and Armstrong were going to sit down. And certainly I had suspected at some point in time he would do a tell-all interview, because once the evidence was all out, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that he was doping. And so I thought the mea culpa was eventually going to happen. But I had not suspected that it would be on with Oprah, and I had not suspected that it would be as soon as it was. And so he did that interview with Oprah. I don't know if any of you all saw it, but it was not well received. I think it was too soon. From putting my PR person hat on, I think from his standpoint, he probably was still in shock a little bit about what had happened. I think it was probably way too soon for him to have done something of that sort. He hadn't really had time to absorb it himself. But he did it, and it did not go well. And you start to see Rick Riley, who had been his friend, really shifting that message. And I think for people to see Lance sit down and actually admit to what he had done in some parts, he wasn't fully truthful in others, but he at least sat down and admitted that he had doped during all of his Tour de France wins, that this really changed a lot of the perspective. And so you see Buzz Bissinger, who used to say he still believed in Lance, comes out and then says he was deluded to believe so. We didn't actually ever see anything from Sally Jenkins. She didn't really engage in changing her opinion, but I think given her financial connections with him in the book, I'm not really sure what those rules were. So really, where do we go from here? And I think continued international cooperation is very big from our perspective. We worked with a lot of our international counterparts on this and continued to long after the Postal Service case happened. And I think that's really important to remember, is it was not just Armstrong. Armstrong got the most attention, but we've sanctioned more than 25 people as a result of this case, including doctors, trainers, people that were team owners, other cyclists around the world that were still working in the sport. A variety of different folks have been involved in this. In addition to this happening, the person who was in charge of international cycling at the time, and through our investigation was found to have had some knowledge of what was going on, actually lost his job, and they replaced him with somebody else who's actually been really positive for the sport moving forward. So a lot of really good international cooperation. The second piece is focusing on the future. Where do we go from here? How do we make the sport move forward from this doping era? How do we keep it clean? And really some of that comes down to the clean athletes. How do we create a culture in that sport where people aren't doping, where young athletes who come up throughout the sport don't have to make the same decision? So that's been a big piece for us as well. So I think those are sort of the big key areas for me that I wanted to highlight for you guys. And I think if there's anything I would suggest to take away from it, is the importance of the strategic plan, sticking with that strategic plan, focusing on the long-term outcome that you're hoping for in the crisis, and really not losing sight of your mission and what your values are, and keeping that message going. So I'm glad to take any questions that you have. Hopefully, I think I've given us about 15 minutes left to do Q&A, and would love to help with that.
Terrific, Annie. That was really wonderful. And of course, we do have some questions. I would like to ask first, based on your last comment, in terms of strategic planning, did you all engage in real formal strategic planning in which you went through these questions and sort of documented a plan of attack and then adjusted your plan as you went through? And if not, what else did you do in terms of strategic planning?
Yeah, I mean, I think we focused on sort of the key areas that we knew we were going to be. What was sort of the political strategy? What was the public relations strategy? What was the legal strategy? How we were going to move through that process? What we needed to prepare ahead of time? But we also added enough flexibility into that plan to know that we were going to need to roll a little bit with how things changed and developed. Mm-hmm. But definitely had a plan going into it, and to some extent from the PR side, a written plan, and really focusing on that process.
Sure. And then did you all, previous to this even coming into your, onto the horizon at all, does the USADA actually have a crisis communications or an emergency communications plan in place that you were able to build on, or did you sort of do both at the same time?
We have sort of a base plan for crisis communication, but this really needed to be more specialized and developed given given the nuances of this situation, because it wasn't just Armstrong, it was also involved with the whole U.S. Postal Service team. It involved international riders, it involved an international sport, other anti-doping agencies. It was sort of a different situation than anything we would have normally dealt with in our traditional crisis plan. So we certainly have a framework of that, but this needed to be built on top of that.
Yeah, I'm sure. But you do have something in place. You sort of have something on place ongoing that you were at least able to start from.
Yes, yeah, we weren't reinventing the wheel. No, absolutely not.
Nice. So that means you probably had documentation. Lots of information, it sounds like, was put out by the pro-Armstrong parties and his various allies, and it sounds like many different arenas. What, if anything, did you all do to sort of distribute truthful information in the face of that sort of deluge? For example, the fact that you were not giving him due process, or his accusations that he was being singled out. Was there something you did actually during these accusations, or did you just wait for your day in court and then talk about it afterward?
No, we absolutely, as part of our communication strategy, had ongoing conversations for that. And I showed you guys a little bit of the pre-planned sheets that we had available. But we also used social media to the best of our ability to put out links to all of our statements, to post statements on our website. We also worked with our established media relationships. So there were a lot of media that had been covering this case for a long time that knew that they had their own evidence too that Armstrong had doped. So people from the New York Times, ESPN, Wall Street Journal, a variety of those folks were reporters who were very smart on the issue. And so we were able to work with those reporters who were interested in actually getting facts out to get those stories out that contained facts. But we also put a lot of information on our website, distributed that information out through press releases, through statements, a variety of other areas while those attacks were ongoing. So it certainly wasn't just sitting in silence and waiting until the end. We did have to be careful throughout to not to make sure that the legal process was still, we were where we needed to be from a legal perspective in what we could say when we could say it. But absolutely during that process, we're communicating our points as well.
Gotcha. So did you feel a need to actually address these accusations point by point, or did you just sort of keep putting your key messages out there?
We generally focused more on not getting in a tit for tat, and because that's really where he wanted us to go, right? He wanted it to get down and make it personal, an us versus him situation, and that's not what it was for us. It wasn't about him specifically. It was about the fact that this athlete had violated the rules. So we really kept it at a higher level, generally in response to questions from reporters about whether it's the due process, whether it's about how we adjudicate cases, any of those things. We worked with those reporters on those issues rather than responding to him specifically in a lot of situations. We tried to make it as not personal or tit for tat as possible.
Yeah, and really in the face of social media, because that's one of the big concerns in the crisis communications community, is social media spreads things so quickly, etc. And it sounds like you use social media sort of like you use it in a normal basis. You may have used it at a greater volume, but you didn't actually try to get out there and deal with this on the social media platform.
It was just not going to be possible for us to be competitive in that, nor did I really think that it fit our brand or our mission to get into these battles on Twitter. And I think it's kind of a lose situation from my perspective. Let's take it to that higher level of conversation. Certainly if there was a person that had a legit question that we could guide them to somewhere on Twitter, social media, we would respond to that. and just like we would any other time, but we really stuck with our social media strategy as it was, and didn't take it as a time to sort of try to engage in changing minds on Twitter. We used it more as a way to distribute our message, rather than engaging in conversations.
Great. So Jackie Fisher asks, did you have a higher headquarters, quote unquote, to answer to during this process and or run your communications pass before executing? If so, how did that work in terms of getting the job done in a timely manner?
Yeah, and that's a great question. We actually were very, very lucky early on. Both our CEO and our general counsel were very aware that PR was going to have to be a very important part of this process, and that they looped us in throughout the whole thing so we could really be prepared. And I know that not everybody gets that luxury when dealing with the crisis. I think sometimes we far too often hear from the legal side of things, no comment, we have no comment. And I was very lucky in the situation that was not the case with our general counsel or with our CEO. But absolutely, I was accountable to both the CEO and to our legal team headed by our general counsel, as well as we have an independent board of directors, and our CEO was working with our board of directors through this process as well. But it actually moved relatively quickly because they really fully understood how important the PR aspect of this was going to be, and so they gave it a priority, which was very great and helpful for us.
Well, knowing that it was happening ahead of time, I mean, this wave was building, and so
Yeah.
you were able to sort of respond much more proactively than you would in a lot of crisis situations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that was a huge benefit for us in terms of being able to prepare for that strategy.
Sure. In terms of long-term effects that you've seen as a result of the communications you engaged in during this crisis, have you seen anything sort of positive or negative fallout in terms of either athlete responses or your relationships with them? You're mentioning a lot of other folks that are involved in the larger community of doping, like physicians and et cetera, the public, your internal staff. Has there been something that you've seen that's gone well or not so well as a result of your communications planning?
Yeah, I think really staying mission focused and not making it personal and not getting down in the weeds and fighting it out, in the mud was a very good strategy for us. Not only just because that's who we are as an organization, but really it gave athletes the confidence that if they were ever in a situation where they were going to have to have a case with us, or we're going to have to work with us on one of these issues, that they could see that we would handle it in a professional manner. And so that's been really big. I think what we've also seen is we have a we call the Play Clean tip line, and those athletes can call in if they suspect that there's doping happening in their sport. And we've seen a huge increase in that, in people that have called in now. And I think really because they've recognized that if we're willing to do the right thing, no matter how hard it is, and we're willing to deal with a major athlete at this level, then we're really going to be willing, that we're actually going to do what we say we're going to do and what we say we're here to do. And so we've seen that trust from athletes really build as a result of that.
That's nice. Gosh, how did you guys keep up the energy to sustain this effort? It went on for months, years. You must have been exhausted when it was over.
Yeah, I think it was important to make sure that our internal staff was also taking care of themselves, and sometimes you just had to turn, I would get calls in the middle of the night from people from South Africa, reporters from South Africa, or somebody in a different time zone. And I think one of the key things I learned quickly was that when you want to sleep, turn off your phone and make sure you're trying to get some sleep during the night. But yeah, and I think really what sustained us for the long term was we knew what the right thing to do was. We knew what we were doing was the right thing. We knew we were in pursuit of the truth and that we were following our mission and what we were supposed to be doing. And so I think that really helped to sustain us over the long haul, was that we all felt invested in knowing that what we were doing was the right thing as an organization. And that really helped us to deal with that.
Yeah, I'm sure it was not easy. I've got one other question. It's a real practical question. But before I do, to the folks who are listening, and thanks for hanging in with us. We've got almost everybody still here. Last call for questions. If anybody has anything else they'd like to ask Ms. Skinner, now's the time. My last question for you is just a real day-to-day thing. So you mentioned these surrogates that you had to answer questions. Can you kind of comment on how you amassed those folks? I mean, were they who were they, and how, what kind of arrangement did you make with them, and how is it that they were able to commit some time to this in addition to the time you all were committing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think most of them were folks that work at other anti-doping agencies around the world. So we have counterparts across the world that were really able to help their media in those markets understand the process and what we do and how the rules are. And so a lot of that was working within my network of communications people at those different organizations and letting them know, hey, not giving them details of the case per se, but also saying, one of the key issues that Armstrong is talking about and his team is talking about is this. You may get questions about that from media. Here's, here's what the facts are. And then they were able to really to share that message as well. Because the rules we follow are the same rules that they follow in their country, and so they were able to really help to put those messages out as well from that broader perspective.
So
it really was
able to draw
using
on
the
your
network.
Community. Yeah, that's
great.
Yep. Yeah, that's
and
really good.
It's the community of communications people that were just so key in helping through this.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you very much again. I mean, this has been fascinating, and like I said, we have had almost everybody hang on. Thank you all for attending today. We hope this was good. Let us know through the survey, and don't forget next November, the next webinar Wednesday in November, measuring ROI on your communications plan, on your communications products. Blue Pencil and Gold Screen Awards competition open today, so go ahead and get your nominations started. Call for speakers for NAGC Communications School, and we'll see everybody on the third Wednesday of November. Thanks so much. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.